if I haven't met you, my name is Myers Raymer. I'm very grateful, recovered alcoholic from Texas, and holy cow, it's such a cool deal to be back over there in those rooms, even if it is the middle of the night. And I had to drink 15 monster drinks just to stay awake. I'm only 2 hours past my bedtime now, so we go to bed real early in Texas, especially when you're old as dirt like I am. But it's a treat to see you cats. My head's about to explode. I've got so much stuff that I want to talk about tonight. We're at the bindery, a book bindery in Central Texas, and I live up closer to Dallas, and we're packing, heading back in the morning. And so we've been at it since way before sunup, trying to get it all done. But during the course of the day, I kept thinking about stuff I wanted to talk about, and so we'll see. I need to tell you. I need to tell you this much story because it affects the other stuff that I want to talk about tonight. And so I'll talk a little bit about that and give you a little bit of a stuff. I sobered up in January of 1988. And I got one sobriety date, January 15th, 88. And my twin brother, the evil twin, Chris, has got dozens of sobriety dates, and he had been trying for a long, long time. But at one point, he actually got sober and stayed sober in November of 87. So he got 2 months of sobriety on me, and he reminds me all the time. It's getting ready to start. Come November the 12th, he'll start reminding me again about how, you know how that goes. Chris actually saved my life twice in AA. Once when I sobered up, and then 7 years later when I was suicidal and crazier than a crap house rat. Chris scooped me up and helped me get plugged in to some things that I'd been just missing for a long time. And the only reason I even tell this part of the story, guys, my history is goofy, and I come from a long line of drunks. I knew when I was 18 that I was an alcoholic. My dad was an alcoholic. My grandfather was an alcoholic. My great-grandfather was an alcoholic. It just, the Raymer family tree is full of little drunks and dope fiends. And that's just it. But I'm also a functioning alcoholic in that I could work drunk, courted my beautiful wife drunk, raised my first daughter drunk. I mean, it's all groovy until it's not. I mean, some of y'all may be able to relate. I sponsor a lot of young guys that, crashed and burned at 16 and they never really had any run with it like this. And God love you. I guess it's a cool side to that too. You didn't have to go through some of the crazy stuff. But it's, I was fine until I wasn't, until I crossed that line. And all of a sudden it got to where I couldn't do anything without getting into trouble. Somewhere along the line, some outside issues got introduced into the thing that sort of sped things up. And if you catch my drift, and it was just pretty goofy. And so Chris takes me to my first meeting, and I fell in love with AA. And I went to a couple of other fellowships for a little while, but in the Dallas-Fort Worth area where I live, AA was the predominant place to get sober anyway. And so I fell in love and stayed there. I thought it was the coolest thing in the whole wide world. We had 32 meetings a week, and all of them were discussion meetings. We had no literature-based meetings. We had no book studies. We had nothing. We just had we had sober bowling. We had sober softball. We had I don't know. Y'all get the picture. It was just a love fest. I mean, we hug each other, and it was just great. It was a lot of love and a lot of camaraderie, and it treated fellowship. I mean, it treated loneliness like nothing I'd ever seen. And some of y'all can relate to that. The problem with that stuff is that at some point in time, it stopped treating the things that were getting kind of serious. Somebody would later say, Myers, you didn't recognize that you were restless, irritable, and discontent. And I said, I knew I was restless, irritable, and discontent, but because I'd never read the book, I never connected it up with an indication that maybe I was still dying of untreated alcoholism. Maybe I was struggling here. I didn't know. Because I look, how many of y'all are like me that you fall into the illusion that if I could just get rid of the booze, if I can just get rid of the other stuff, I'll be okay. I mean, that's the only thing that's wrong with me. All I got to do is just get rid of that. Well, I did. And long about 4 years into the gig, I'm going to 6 meetings a week, and I'm just coming apart. I'm starting to have anxiety attacks that I'd never had before. I mean, it's serious enough that I don't feel comfortable driving. It's kind of scary. I'm also taking flying lessons at the time, and it's a little uncomfortable when you're having anxiety attacks and you're trying to fly an airplane. It's just not very fun. But I'm also dealing with depression that's starting to come back, and I had struggled with some of that before, but all of a sudden it's coming back. But it's like on steroids. It's like nothing I'd ever experienced before. I remember this lady one time, she said, we were in a meeting and we were talking about depression. And she said, oh, I know. I remember getting up and I felt sort of blue, and I'm going, time out, sister. That's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm talking, I can't get out of bed. I can't function. It's kind of ugly. I'm starting to spend tons of money that I don't have. I'm buying. I finally got a license to fly an airplane, and so I bought an airplane. And then a little while later, I bought another airplane. And then a couple of years later, you guessed it, I had to buy just one more, Londa, just one more. I'm trying to explain to my wife how I need 3 airplanes. I mean, it doesn't. I'm just simply trying to fix this internal thing. I'm buying tools I don't use. I'm buying music I don't listen to. I'm buying clothes I don't wear. I'm just like, y'all can relate. I think some of you can certainly relate to what's going on like that. My family is perplexed. They thought as soon as I got sober that everything was going to get groovy and it was going to be sweet. And it was a little bit. It for a bit it was, and then it got goofier and goofier, and then finally they don't know who's coming home. Let me ask you a question: how many of y'all have ever left an AA meeting feeling like you were a spiritual giant? I mean, that share was magnificent in there, and then by the time you get home, your head's wrapped around something weird, and all it takes is anything at home. You step over some book bags that laying in the front foyer, or there's dirty dishes in the kitchen sink, or it doesn't make any difference what it is, guys. Something sets you off, and all of a sudden you're throwing things and acting like a little kid. And that's me. I'm sort of the poster boy of acting like a little kid, which is not good. So I had one daughter when I got sober, and then we had another daughter right after I got sober, and then we're going to have another one a little bit later down the road. And so it's like crazy. I can't figure out. I'm going to these meetings and I'm leaving, not understanding what's going on. I got to be perfectly transparent with everybody that's here. In that length of time, I didn't work the steps, and I had a sponsor in name only. He drove a Mercedes, and he had a nice suit of clothes. He was a business guy like me, and I thought I could relate to him. We never talked about the steps. We never talked about anything. It was just a fellowship. My head was full of a lot of confusing ideas about what recovery was supposed to be, and I'm a 100% in for let's stay sober one day at a time kind of guy. That's me, and it's not working really well. Eventually, it got bad enough that my wife said, I think, I don't know how to tell you this, but I think I'm going to move to Houston without you. And in the meantime, if you would move down to the other end of the room, to the little bitty bed down there, and I'm going to stay in the big bed on this end of the house. And so there it was. Here I am, 6.5 years sober at the time, living in opposite ends of the house with my family because I'm a nut job. I'm just crazy. And so I carried on for a little bit longer. Than I ended up almost drinking one night. I'm just shy of 7 years sober, and I called Chris. Now, the evil twin lives in Central Texas, down where I am right now. Matter of fact, Chris is about 6 miles from me right now, and he had a sponsor, a guy by the name of Mark Houston, and Mark was teaching him some big book stuff, and Chris was trying to pass that on to me, and I wasn't having it because it just. Guys, I've been sober for 6.5 years. I mean, I don't need a book. I know I can stay sober one day at a time. But I never really stopped to think, though, that there were a lot of people out there that were living sober that were actually enjoying life, that actually could live in the same room with their wife. It never even I'm just not connecting all these dots. I thought maybe I'm slower than I think I am. Eventually, it got scary enough that Chris gave me the name of an old guy in Dallas, and I got to hurry up because I got a bunch of stuff I want to talk about. But Clifford rocked my world. He was an old dude that was sponsored by Joe McQuaney of Joe and Charlie, and so he was a big book kind of guy. And so he always wanted to teach me stuff, and I pushed back some. But eventually, it got to a place where I'm left with no choice. I'm just kind of dangling and kind of blowing in the wind, and I don't know what day I'm going to use, but I know I am. And so I remember Clifford looking at me one night, and he said, Myers, he said, I think that teaching you these steps is going to be one of the easiest things I ever did, getting you through the work so that you'll have this experience. But getting you to unlearn all these old ideas that you brought into this fellowship, I don't know about that. I don't know what we're going to be able to accomplish. And I went, well, golly, okay. And so I stuck with him. He said, would you stay with us and study for a little while, and then you can go back to your home group if that's what you want to do, or if you want to just study. And I said, no, I'll stay. I'll stay for a bit and study. My plan was to get book smart and then go back and be a stud in my home group. I was just going to be, this iconic guru that knew all about the big book like this. But that was the goal, the driving force, I guess. And so I went ahead and stuck with them. And guys, let me just tell you, what happened was over a period of weeks, I got through the steps again. I had this, well, actually for the first time, but I got through the steps. I had this experience, and it rocked my world. And then I did absolutely nothing. I didn't pray. I didn't meditate. I didn't work with others. And I started getting sick again. So I'm approaching 9 years sober. And I'm talking, Clifford still sponsored me. And one night I said, Clifford, I'm still struggling some here. I don't seem to be where y'all are. And he looked at me. I'll never forget it. He took his glasses off and he looked at the ceiling and he looked back at me and he said, Myers, he said, you are not like us. You are not. What you are is selfish and self-centered to the core still. That's one. And two, you're not listening to anything that we're saying. I said, what are you saying? And he said, I want you to get busy and work with some people. And I said, okay, I will. And he said, be at Salvation Army tomorrow night. I did, and they didn't show up. And to this day, they all say that they didn't set me up, but they did. Nobody showed up. And so I got 170 men in the Salvation Army in Dallas, Texas, waiting for somebody to come in and do a book study. And nobody else showed up. And so I knew how to clear security is about all I knew how to do. And I took my book in. I knew kind of where we were from the week before. I'm real big at helping them set up chairs. And then I'd go outside and ignore the meeting. That was sort of me. But I did the deal, and it was the most transformational deal. At the end of the meeting, they asked me to come back the next night, and I did. And that meeting, the second night, changed everything about how I looked at Alcoholics Anonymous, how I looked at other people that were battling addiction. It was the most pivotal thing that had ever happened to me, because it was the moment that I stopped being an AA phony and I started being real, live, authentic guy seeking recovery. And it was a game changer for me. And it has been that way for lots and lots of men that I've sponsored. We can play a lot of games. I remember one time there was this guy, he said, Myers, you do a lot of travel with AA, don't you? And I went, yeah. And he said, I bet that's really cool. You get to meet a lot of people and go to a lot of meetings. And I said, well, it has its moments. And I'm looking at Carl right now in this picture because I know Carl knows exactly what I'm talking about. Guys, it depends on where you go. Just because there's a circle and triangle on the door doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be hearing recovery when you go into that meeting. There's a lot of you guys that are new, some of you gals and guys that are new that are in halfway house stuff right now. Transitional living is my favorite thing in the whole wide world. I love it because most of us are in a position where we're starting to look at the bigger picture. We've got some enough sobriety behind us that we're getting healthy, but we're also in a place where we're trying to decide where we're going once we get clear. and what we're going to do. Guys, not just because there's a circle and triangle on the door doesn't mean that AA is what it's supposed to be. I wish it was not like that, but I'm just telling you, as an old crusty guy, that's my experience in traveling all over the world. Guys, there have been rooms that I've walked into, and halfway through the meeting, I'm sitting here going, I'm looking around the room trying to figure out, did I walk into some weird, crazy, I mean, it doesn't even resemble recovery. You have to pay attention. This is the reason why when I love talking to people that are just getting out of treatment or just getting out of transitional living. And I'll always tell them, guys, y'all be ready to go look at some different meetings. Not, we'll try to hook you up, but you may have to go to some different groups till you find a place that you belong, that place that will satisfy what it is that you need. Anyway, I didn't. That was the part of the problem is I didn't, and so I ended up in a situation where I was so unhappy sitting in the rooms. And I got to tell you guys, it's the most miserable I've ever been in my whole life. Is just trying to stay sober one stupid day at a time. Which, by the way, the book never says that. And it's just a bad way to do it like that. There's a much better way to do that. And I think that we need to kind of move towards that deal. In the book, Bill Wilson, over on page 17, he talks about this common solution, and I never really understood the common solution. Guys, my goal is never to raise an army of big book thumpers out there beating people upside of the head with a book and this kind of stuff. That's never my goal. Love plays a major role in this, and there's a lot of things that really work to our advantage. But the way we carry the message, the way I carry the message, the way Carl carries the message, the way Michael or Joe, Lulu, the way she carries the message, it's going to be different than they're all going to look a little bit different. But the basics of what we're talking about should be the same. It shouldn't be this head scratching. Everybody's talking different stories and different stuff. And so this is where it gets. We got to pay attention, kind of what we're doing. Let me ask you a question. Because we got young folks in here, and we also have some older guys that are in here like that. I wonder how many of you guys ever stop and think about the bigger picture of recovery stuff? I know Carl does, because I've talked to him about it before. This thing, we've been here for 85 plus years now, and we've kind of fought for a lot of good stuff here. And I think sometimes it's important to realize and recognize that a few short years before Bill and Bob and those guys codified AA and made it what it was, a few short years before that, if you were a drunk or a dope fiend and you were out there in trouble, they didn't know what to do with you, they put you in asylums where you would spend the rest of your life. And it was a horrible place. There's a book out there called Slaying the Dragon. Some of you may have read it like this. It's a guy named William White that wrote this thing. And it's a fascinating walk through what addiction looked like early in the United States, and what it looked like at the time that they were putting these people in these asylums. They had hundreds of these asylums spread across the United States, and they had tens of thousands of people that killed themselves in these asylums every year at their own hand because they were so miserable. They had been separated from the booze or the dope. They'd been separated from that and then put in these days. There's no program. There's no spiritual deal. There's no nothing. They were just put in there to live their life, quote unquote, sober, and they came apart. And it's funny that it's not funny, but it's interesting that as a fellowship, we don't look at that, and we don't recognize that in some cases we're perpetuating this ugliness with the idea that if we just separate the brand new people from the booze or the dope, they're going to be okay. And the reality of it is, unless something treats the internal condition, unless something is there to do that, guys, you're not going to dig recovery. You're not going to do it. You're going to end up just like I was at 7 years sober, and you're going to be really, really uncomfortable in your own skin. It's not a good place to be. This is the reason why it was such an amazing deal that in a few short years, Bill and Bob and and some of these early guys, these first 100 men and women that had got together on this kind of stuff, were able to put together a program that guaranteed that we could live a life completely transformed if we would just simply do what they did, which is badass. I mean, that's a pretty cool deal like that we were given that opportunity. But the reason I talk about it, guys, is I think it's something that we need to protect. I think it's something that we need to nurture and take care of. Listen, the reason that I'm sensitive about it is because I talk in dozens and dozens of Zooms every month, different ones. I've never counted how many, but a whole bunch of them. And I'm caught completely off guard by how different the cultures are in some of these meetings that I go to worldwide. In some of them, the love and the affection and the back and forth and stuff like this is outstanding. Sitting in front of this meeting when I was just visiting with you guys when we first got here, the back and forth between folks really makes me smile. I've been in Zooms, guys, where nobody said anything for 10 minutes. Nobody said anything. The room is filling up with people. We don't know who's new. We don't know who's old. We don't know anything. And they're filling up and nobody's saying anything. And you just kind of go like, golly, come on. Would I come back to a meeting like that? Not a chance. Not a chance. And so we have to protect that stuff and see it's worth. Sometimes it takes a little courage to move towards the things that are right and make the right decisions than it is to do what just feels this will be the easiest thing to do. And so I'll just sit through it and kind of ignore it. Somebody asked me the other day, they said, Myers, if you could change anything about AA, what would it be? And I had to think about it. And I said, I don't know. I'll have to get back to you. And so the next day I got an email from that same guy that asked me the question. And he said, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I was really interested. And I said, it was a great question and I just didn't know how to answer it. Because there are some things that I think that we as a fellowship should look at. Sometimes there's things that we need to talk about that we don't talk about. And I think that probably we should. One of the things for sure that I would do if there's any way that I could just snap my fingers and make it different. How many of y'all remember a guy named Don Pritz? Kind of an iconic guy from up in the Denver area. And Don, in an early talk that Don did, he said, I'm a bit disturbed because at some point in time, we stopped talking about recovery and just settled on sobriety. And I remember at the time when I heard the talk, I didn't connect really well with it. I didn't really think anything about it. And then later I remember thinking about it again and going, it makes a lot of sense. Guys, there's a world of difference between trying to stay sober one day at a time and seeking recovery. If you go back in the text and look at how often the folks in the early days in AA talked about recovery, look at how many times it's mentioned in the book, look at how many times they refer to it. One of the most fascinating things that I ever saw was a TV thing in the early 70s when they were trying to kind of get the Hughes Act right at the end of President Nixon's presidency. They had enacted this thing called the Hughes Act, which sort of put the teeth in the treatment industry. It was fairly fascinating. And there were newspaper articles, and they had one particular deal where they had a recording of a bunch of these guys that showed up in Congress to testify. And one of the things that they were all doing, they had politicians and astronaut, a bunch of sports figures, a bunch of movie stars and actors, and this stuff. And they were all there, and they all introduced themselves as recovered. All of them. And then so you take that example and you put it next to all of the early first 100 and how they wrote the book and what they talked about. And I mean, over on page 90, they even asked us to introduce ourselves that way. They made it perfectly clear. Guys, listen, if just saying sober one day at a time is all you need, rock on. But you're missing the biggest part of this whole thing is this idea that I could get up, that I could do what I need to do. I think the last time I talked to you guys, I told you a story about this cat that I sponsor who got real emotional. And he called me one day, and his daughter was getting married, and he couldn't go to the wedding, and he was upset because they were going to serve champagne at the wedding, and he couldn't go. And I said, I don't understand. And I said, are we talking about that trigger list shit again? And he said, yeah, we're talking about the trigger list stuff. And I said, well, okay. So I got to make sure I got this right. You're not going to go to your daughter's wedding because they're going to serve champagne at the reception. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, okay, you're an idiot. I don't know what to say. I mean, I've got 3 daughters, and I wouldn't miss it. For anything like that. That doesn't sound like freedom to me. That sounds like bondage. It sounds just like painful way to live your life. And the first 100, our founding fathers never, ever, ever intended for us to live life like that. We've been handed a deal that was shortchanged, and we just live with it like that. It drives me insane. I always say this when I talk about that particular story. I always say, if y'all have never been to Amsterdam, or next time you see Chris, the evil twin, ask him about our layover. We were coming back from Denmark and had a 13-hour layover in Amsterdam, and they had a mess up with the weather, and so we were grounded for a while there. And so we spent 13 hours walking around the red light district in Amsterdam. And guys, I got to tell you, if you're a youngster and you've never read about it, go Google and then erase it, okay? But just go Google Amsterdam red light district and see what comes up, and yeah. Come on, guys. I want freedom. I don't want to live a life in bondage where every day I'm wondering if today I'm going to step on something and be in trouble. I don't want that. I can't go that way because my old bar was down there. Phooey on your old bar. Come on, get past it like that. That's what this stuff is all about. The second thing that I would do, if there was any way that I could change it, would be to make sure that everybody understands in their very first meeting, day one, not years later, but day one, that our program centers around the steps and a relationship with our Creator. Those two things. It's not necessarily a meeting. Now, let me be really, really clear. I always get emails when I talk about this stuff, and people go, Myers, it sounds like you don't like meetings. Stop. Don't say that. I do like meetings. I love me a meeting. I truly do. But guys, there's nowhere in our literature, there's nowhere in the archival stuff that I've ever been able to read in the early days of AA when our success rates were far better than they are today. There's nowhere there that it talks about centering everything around a meeting. And yet everybody from Dr. Phil to Oprah to every treatment center I've ever been involved with, that's the questions they want to ask. How many meetings did you go to? What? Listen. I remember sitting having coffee one morning with Joe McQuaney, the Joe and Charlie guys. Joe McQuaney and Cliff Bishop and I were sitting there having coffee, and we were talking about some of this stuff. And Joe looked at me and he said, Myers, he said, I got to tell you, this stuff always boils down to two things. How much time did you spend with God today? And how much time did you spend with God's kids today? And I went, okay, yeah, that's cool. And then I completely forgot it. It didn't even make any sense. It would be years later that I would rethink about that, and I would go, you know what? He's absolutely right. The quicker I could get Joe, who's a brand new guy in the room, the quicker I could get him on track, understanding the importance of having a deepening relationship with his Creator. That doesn't mean that every third or fourth day when I'm struggling, I'm going to stop and say, God, help me get out of this mess I've created again. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking every day there will be a discipline of prayer and meditation that will change over a period of time, but it's always going to be there. And during that prayer time, I'm going to ask God to bring people into my life that I can help. and watch what happens. This guy stopped me after a meeting one time, and I was in Europe, and this guy said, he came up after the talk, and he said, Myers, he said, let me ask you a question. He said, don't you think that the meeting is important? I said, well, of course I do. And he said, well, I mean, don't you think that I could just go to a bunch of meetings and stay sober? And I said, maybe. But why do you want to miss the best part of the deal? Bill Wilson spent a whole chapter talking about working with others. Why do you want to miss that part? And he said, well, it's not like that. It's just that some people I think are better at that than others. And I'm going, this is what plagued me for years. This is what dang near destroyed me and my family, was this idea that somehow I am not going to be able to do 12-step work. I'm too stupid. I'm too busy. You fill in the blank. It doesn't matter what it is. I'm too this, I'm too that, I'm too whatever. Listen, one of the most effective 12-steppers I ever worked with in my whole life was a guy that came in right in off the street, couldn't read, couldn't write, and had some learning disabilities. He was a little slow. But let me tell you something. I read stuff to him, and we talked about stuff to him like this. And when he got on fire and started sponsoring guys, it'll blow you away how many men that guy has sponsored over the years. At one point, he was sponsoring almost 30 men that were coming out of 2 different treatment places, long-term halfway houses in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I mean, this guy was like an Amazon doing this stuff. Come on, we're tough on ourselves, guys, and we got to stop doing that. We need to. I mean, I hear these guys all the time. Well, when I get out of school, I'll have time. When I get this, when I get that job, when I get this, quit. Are you sober today? Super. It's time to get busy. It's time to go see who you can help. I damn near jumped up and down applauding when Michael said, stick around after the meeting if you're new so we can talk to you. Guys, I can't tell you how many Zoom meetings I've talked to where I've watched brand new guys say, I'm brand new, I've got 2 days sober. And then I've watched them after the meeting on the participant list, and I've watched them. I'm looking right at them, and everybody just ignores them. Just ignores them. Come on. I'll slip in there and grab. The other night I slipped in and started talking to somebody like this, and then somebody wrote me a dadgum email the next day saying, well, don't you have people in your own home group that you could talk to? And I'm just going, don't get me stirred up. Don't get me. This is life and death stuff, guys. It truly is. And so we need to, yeah. Last thing I want to talk about for just 2 seconds is this idea of telling newcomers when they come in that if they hang around long enough, they'll hear what they need to hear. Guys, listen, as much as I would love to make that work, I can't get it to line up with my own experience. Listen, it may line up with yours. I'm not saying that. But I've talked to too many people over the years. I've worked in the treatment field for 8 or 9 years on a part-time basis, and I'm blown away by how many people had experience with AA. They've been in AA for a period of time and then left because they didn't hear the things that they needed to. And I said, well, why don't we talk about this stuff? And I'll show them stuff right out of the book, and they go, nobody ever showed me this. This is the first. This is so exciting. I'm starting to hear things that I never heard before, and I'm going, yes, exactly. Guys, time is not your friend when you're working with brand new guys. We can get real goofy sometimes about that stuff. And if you go back in the book and you looked at that little piece over there where that in italics over on page 24, and they talk about you won't remember with sufficient force the pain and suffering of even a week or a month ago, that little piece right there. And it's the truth. How many of you guys, I bet you Carl's done this. I bet, how many of you guys have experienced an opportunity to work with somebody that just got to treatment or just got to transitional living, and they're compliant, they're excited, they're motivated, there's some willingness there to do the things that are necessary to do like this. And then if for whatever reason you don't get a chance to work with them, there used to be a place in Dallas called Homeward Bound. And it was a 90-day program. And these guys would come in, and they were a lot of them right in off the street. I did 12-step stuff there for years and years and years. And one of my favorite all-time places to carry the message. And it was amazing what they wanted us to do. They said, you can do steps 1, 2, and 3 with them when you first meet them, but you can't do any inventory with them until they coin out at 90 days. And I said, okay, we'll take what we can get. And so we would teach what we could teach up through the 3rd step. They'd be absolutely excited. And I go, okay, buddy, I'll be here every week anyway. But when we get to the end of this, we're going to do this inventory. And I cannot tell you, I couldn't count how many times the same little cat that was so excited about recovery at 2 weeks sober, 90 days sober, he's in the back of the room with his hat on backwards, with his chair kicked against the back wall, just sitting back there like that, ignoring me completely. And I'm looking at him going, dude, you still going to do some inventory, right? Well, I've been thinking about this, Myers. I think really my problem is I'm just making a bunch of bad decisions. And I think I'm just going to, when I leave here, I'm just going to make better decisions. I'm going, really? You see? And I've watched this stuff. I mean, I've watched it in my own experience. Given enough time, I will justify and rationalize all kinds of atrocious behavior. And we see this over and over and over again. If you go back and read anything that's archival in early AA stuff, the one thing that jumps out at you, if you're reading Clarence Snyder, if you're reading anything that you read in the first 20 years or so of AA, the one thing that you'll notice right off the bat is the timeliness of getting folks through the work. Almost everybody got through the work between 30 and 45 days. Almost everybody. And their success rates were far better than ours today. Far better than ours. Time is not your friend. You can go to a lot, you may be geographically an area where they're going to talk a lot about good stuff and you may learn a whole lot. Or you may be in places where I sobered up, which was kind of the armpit of the AA world in Texas. And we didn't hear anything that was recovery based. All we did was, I knew everything about your sick cat. I knew everything about your garden that wouldn't grow tomatoes. I knew everything I knew it all, but I didn't know anything about what recovery looked like. And that's kind of the struggle. One more thing, and then I'll shut up, I promise. That one more thing, I think it's important to just consider this and just to think about that stuff. The idea that your story defines alcoholism is something that we do over and over and over again. I don't think that some of us even recognize that we're doing it like that. If you go back and look in the forward to the 2nd edition over XVI, and you look at that page, you'll end up with two places on that page. They talk about Silkworth's ideas about alcoholism, and they refer to it twice on that page. Silkworth was not an alcoholic, so he wasn't telling his story. What he was telling these guys, who later took it to Bill and then Bill to Bob, what they took was not their story, although they did say in the beginning of that, but what they ended up talking about was what alcoholism was. So stick with me. What's interesting is when you're in a room full of people, ask the question, what is alcoholism? And then see what they say. If you do it in a meeting, what will happen is, and I've done it a bunch of times when I'm traveling, if you do it in a meeting, what will happen is that one guy will share, or if you have an opportunity to share first and you can share what alcoholism is, all you got to do is go back and read chapter 2 and chapter 3, more about alcoholism, and there is a solution. There's a physical component. There's a mental component. It's all driven by a spiritual component. They're putting a face on what alcoholism is. But in the meetings, what happened is that somebody will go, well, for me, and then they start telling a story about a DWI or about something else like this. And guys, but what if you never had a DWI? What if you never ate out of a dumpster? What if you never had sex with a bunch of collie dogs? I'm trying to make a point here like that. Maybe it's not the point I was supposed to make, but this is the point where we got to understand if there's a reason that people leave AA. Guys, we have never, in 85 plus years, we've never had any problem getting people to come to Alcoholics Anonymous, ever. We've always been able to pull people into to our fellowship. We've had a hell of a time getting them to stay. Statistically, they don't stay. And they don't stay because the only thing we're throwing at them is a story over and over and over again. Look at Fred's story and Jim's story in the front of the book. In More About Alcoholism. In both of those stories, Jim's story and Fred's story, AA comes and sees them, tells them a little story, then tells them what alcoholism is. And then they both step in the middle of it, get loaded again, go back out. And then when they come back, they call AA comes back. And then in both examples, it's word for word. In both examples, they come back and it said, we told them what we knew about alcoholism. They didn't say we shared our story again. We told them what we knew about alcoholism. Guys, this is huge stuff. This is huge. Why do I think it's huge? Because I sponsor men all over the world, and I am sickened by how many men have been in these rooms year after year after year and still can't tell you what alcoholism is. They still don't know. They know their story. And you got to have a story. I'm not ragging on the story part of it, but at some point in time, we have to pull back from telling the story, and we have to sit with them, tell them what alcoholism is, that it's a progressive disease that gets worse, never better. And then we pull them with a vision of what recovery could actually look like. You know, you can't push somebody up a ladder. Sometimes there's two things I can never give you. I can't give you willingness, and I can't give you gratitude. And those two things hopefully will come with the picture once we're able to explain how cool it is as we pull them with this vision of how cool this stuff could be. Pretty fascinating. Guys, there are a lot of things in my life that I'm proud of. And I've got a fine family, and I've had a great work career, and I've gotten to meet a lot of folks, and some of y'all can relate. I know Carl can relate to what I'm talking about like that. There's so many things that I'm grateful for. The one thing that I'm more grateful for than anything is that over the years, I've had an opportunity to be in the lives of lots and lots of men, and that I was able to change the course of some of those men's lives. I've been able to affect change, and in some case, actually save those lives. And that's some heady stuff when you think about it. Most of us, regardless of how long you've been sober, can think back to a day when I was parking my car in a driveway sideways and doing some crazy stuff. And y'all remember those days where I couldn't help anybody, much less myself, where pretty much I was a train wreck. And to think that these days I can do things that affect other people's lives, watching those youngsters, those men and women in those halfway houses just a minute ago, and seeing them and seeing the journey that's ahead of them. Guys, we get to choose that journey. We get to decide what that journey looks like. If it's just a sea of nonstop meetings where we just recite a bunch of chicken shit aphorisms off the wall, think, just don't drink, if that's all you want, rock on. But if you want a life that's truly transformational, if you want a life that truly means something, then we get to make that decision too. And it starts with some seriousness and studying the text, and then be willing to do something for somebody else. Be willing to get out of your head. And in the end, you'll wake up one day and you'll sit on the edge of your bed. You'll sit there, be kind of scratching your beard, looking out the window, and you'll realize that for the very first time in your life, you're okay in your own skin. The restless, irritable, and discontent is gone. And you're actually living a life that you never dreamed that you could live. That's some exciting stuff, guys. That's some cool stuff. My prayer is that it'll happen to every one of you. And thanks for letting me share tonight. I appreciate it all.